When do you go too far? Or is there ever like a perfect balance between like being responsibly strategic, business side of things, or let's pray about everything?
Maybe the tension is, what is the purpose of the church? What if we had to see that we're not in competition with other churches, but there's other things that we are in competition with? So what are we actually in competition with?
Okay.
Might not be other churches. Is this church still about Jesus and the gospel?
I want to show a clip. I want to get your initial reaction, and then we'll weigh in a little bit. Kia ora koutou, and welcome to Lunch on the Way. Have you ever felt the tension between the church world and the business world bringing church strategy, principles, and leadership into the church world, and you haven't felt that good about it? Well, today we bring in Louise Wernich, who helps me understand that I need to calm down a little bit, basically. She completed an MBA this year in business leadership and wrote a master's thesis on it, and she helped herself understand how the business world can actually apply within church leadership and ministry, while also maintaining the distinctness of the church and not being kind of contaminated by the business world for growth and metrics and success. Louise is an ordained minister within the Methodist Church of South Africa, and she's been living in New Zealand for a couple years now. And we've already had her on once before in Lunch on the Way earlier this year, and this is her second appearance on the podcast. In this conversation, we look at some basic business strategies and principles that might apply to the church to help them understand and help us understand just the landscape in which our churches are living in. But she also talks about her master's thesis, which looks at how migrant churches might be navigating through the waters of multiculturalism and finding a new identity within themselves as they move to New Zealand. Well, here is our conversation with Louise Wernich. Louise, this is your second appearance in under one calendar year. I think we had you on earlier this year talking about your life, what it's like living in New Zealand from South Africa, and then some fun ministry stories and leading through COVID. And you've just completed a MBA. So you did the master's thesis, you did all that kind of stuff. And so when did you finish that? When was that done?
I finished that in the beginning of September.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then so you wrote a master's thesis, and what you did was you did a research presentation at Laidlaw, and I thought that was really fascinating. We might get into that near the end.
It was.
But it just sparked into my mind how important it is to actually consider some business practices within church leadership, which isn't a shocker for older generations, like maybe Graham's generation. No offense. Isn't a shocker because it's just like, I had a pastor one time tell me about how his generation, they were all about church leadership. And he said he liked the shift with my generation being more around pastoral leadership. And I think that swing has gone so far into the just, cultivating the pastoral side of what it means to be a pastor or to lead people in congregations, to the neglect of actually how do you lead things well, and how do you strategize, and how do you implement new things. I think that's actually kind of not in the conversation anymore, mostly because there's been a bad taste in the younger generation's mouth. So have you been wrestling with that tension throughout this MBA or prior to it, and have things been confirmed or denied throughout this process?
Yeah, I think I've definitely been wrestling with it. So when I was like an associate pastor, I had quite a few senior ministers who were in that generation where it was all about the vision and the mission and, just kind of driving that. And I think I fell into the perspective of, it's more of a church and we should be pastoral and it's not about those things. And then when I led the church that I was in over COVID, I realized that there was a gap in my thinking because there were so many things that happened, and it kind of felt like I was just drowning a little bit. And I've been pretty good with the pastoral side and the ministry side, but I felt like that running an organizational well, I felt like I struggled there, which is why I did the MBA, because I figured if you can run an organizational well and be a good pastor, like that should be beneficial for the church.
Yeah.
And it was those organizational things that tripped us up, It was staffing issues, restructuring,
So the processes and how you do that was, like, you can do it badly, you can do it well.
Yeah. And I think that when you do it badly, it causes relational issues. And it doesn't matter how good you are as a pastor when there's relational issues.
Yeah.
Was that some of that in relation to, so here in New Zealand, there is business law, but there is law, employment law. And so there are boxes you have to tick as a pastor. If you have a building and it has to be warrant of fitness, if you've got yearly accounts, so they have to be an audit, and then because of the New Zealand charities. So I guess my question there is that those same things exist in South Africa, but just different?
Oh yeah, they definitely do.
Yeah, and you have to do them.
Yep, you do.
Yeah. Did you know about them before?
Yes, I did.
You did. But there's a way of doing them, you're saying?
Yeah, there is a way of doing them.
Right. Okay. All right.
If you can, for yourself, Graeme, if you could be a bit more disclosing, within your pastoral ministry and leading a church, how did you deal with that tension of the business side of things versus the actual ministry side of things, or this more spiritual, less strategic side of things? You know what I mean?
Oh, well, what I did was I formed a financial management team. So they would meet 6 weekly. So it was, but they weren't an entity out. Some of those people that are on that financial team were inside the church leadership team, like the eldership. So because what you didn't want was financial management team. I had that in my first pastorate. Financial management team were a separate entity to the leadership, and so then they start to think they are controlling the direction of the church.
Yeah.
Whereas the financial management team simply serves the team. They make suggestions, but they don't make the.
Yeah.
So that's how I sort of did it, and then.
So you just pushed it to that side of things.
Well, in one sense, I was on that too.
Yeah.
But I realised there's expertise that was needed in that area, setting budgets and things like that, and that it can weigh down church and eldership unnecessarily. Mm-hmm. In the sense you're dealing with the business all the time, and we want to really deal with the vision of the church and the spiritual welfare, all of that. So hence the reason to separate it.
So that's the tension. So there's a tension between the compliance, the strategy, and then there's this intangibility of discerning what God's up to, maybe doing something that doesn't make business sense, doesn't make strategic sense, but you feel like this is the way to go in. Have you given any thought around that tension of when do you go too far? When do you go too far in one direction or the other? Or is there ever a perfect balance between being responsibly strategic, business side of things, if for lack of a better metaphor, or let's pray about everything and then only do what God, prompts us that we can discern in the moment?
I'd love to go back into ministry for 20 years and then answer that question now.
That's telling.
But what I must say, or what I could say, is that throughout my MBA, I kept thinking, oh wow, if I'd known these things in ministry, I might have made different decisions. So I might have handled staffing things slightly differently. Yeah. Perhaps been more pastoral in some aspects and thought how can we develop you as a leader? And in other aspects being okay, you know what, actually you're bringing the whole team down. This is unacceptable behavior. This is not what we expect because we need excellence. So I think I would have changed certain things had I known then what I know now.
Yeah.
But throughout my whole MBA, a lot of it was about strategic thinking. What frameworks can companies use to think things through strategically? What do we need to do in terms of our products and our marketing and things like that? And I constantly thought about the church and thought, maybe the tension is, what is the purpose of the church?
Yeah.
And that I think we discover through prayer and discernment and, spiritual guidance. Then we discover the purpose of the church and we hold on to that. But then there are these different tools that we can use to say, okay, if that's our purpose, then that's what we're measuring ourselves with. So then how do we use some of these business tools or frameworks to get there. So I think with business, it's generally the bottom line is profit.
Yeah.
How do we make the most money?
Easy.
Yeah.
Well, I guess when you boil it down, we're not in business to have fun, or that might be part of enjoying the space. But generally, a business with shareholders, they want returns.
It's profit.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, how do we use some of those principles? But our goal is not profit. Our goal is something different. Our goal is perhaps discipleship, or our goal is, evangelism. What's our goal, mission? But we could use some of those frameworks to actually think through our decisions.
Is the difficulty in discerning what that purpose is because the church is not so targeted like a business, but it's incredibly broad around what its purpose actually is? And so one of the tensions that I'm dealing with in ministry constantly is I'm very strategic. One of my top, I think my second or third strengths finder talent theme or whatever you call it is strategic thinking or strategy. And so I'm always thinking, I'm like, well, a church of our size, 200 people or less, we can't do everything. We can't do everything. But then the church is like, not our church, like Church Universal is like, hey, this is what it means to be the church, and this is all that it involves. And I'm like, it's so difficult to be strategic when you're trying to encapsulate and live within that biblical ecclesiology. So what is that? Is it okay to pick a lane, you think, within as a church? Like, okay, we're going to focus on these couple things and let other churches deal with those few other things? Or should a church be more holistic in its approach?
Both and.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I kept thinking is, so one of the things that we are looking at in the MBA is just like your market share.
Yeah.
So like, who are your competitors? What percentage of the market do you have? And I kept thinking of the church, and I thought, I think sometimes the church falls into the trap where we think other churches are our competitors. But that's actually not true.
There we go.
No.
See,
They're part of our network. So it's like, if I see a gap so if we do an analysis and go like, okay, in this area, these churches are doing these things really, really well. Let's partner with them, because they're not actually our competitors. They're our ecosystem. We're part of the same ecosystem. And then it's like, okay, but here's a definite gap. So we're going to plug more into this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to offer everything. We have to be pastoral. We can't be like, okay, we're only going to... read the book of Matthew, And
yeah, no preacher would ever do that, right?
Yeah,
that's not a thing.
You have to, it has to be, so we do everything.
Yeah.
But I think we can specialize in one or two things if we see the gap there and see churches not as competition.
And I suppose that's one sense of a church also discerning the gifts that actually they have been given and the people that they have. I guess so those variables are the congregation and their giftings, the context in which this church is located, and the context is the demographic in which they and the resources that they have. I mean, this is a problem, the competitive thing, though, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, I experienced this in this pastoring, and nobody kind of names it. They just, but I mean, the brute honesty of that, and maybe that's a bit crude to say that, but if you put on a better show than the one down the road.
Well, I'll tell you.
I mean, I think that's I detest that, but
yeah, but this is the thing. I relate more to that competitive drive. Like even as a kid, I love playing video games, and I found, and sports, not just video games, sports as well. And
misspent childhood.
Misspent childhood. Okay, well, maybe it might be fair. But I remember thinking I played this really popular online game, which is worldwide. And I had the thought, I'm like, if I'm not going to be the best at this, then why am I even trying? And I've actually kind of carried that through into a lot of different things. Like if I'm playing ice hockey, which I do, if I'm not, like, I feel like I need to be one of the best contributors on the team, or else, like, why am I even playing? Like, I'm not here to have fun. I'm here to, like, score goals and to win the game. But so I think a lot of pastors, not all, but I think a lot of them have that kind of mindset. It's a bit of a competitive mindset. So it's almost impossible not to do comparison, because you want to see, well, how, if I think I'm really gifted at preaching, then how do I kind of subconsciously rank within all the other preachers on staff or all the other preachers in the area? And so, yeah, that competitive nature does sneak in there. And then with the business metaphor and bringing business stuff and principles over, it's like there are winners and, if you will, losers. In business, it's very clear the line. Are you making money or are you losing money, right? Yeah, what are your thoughts around that? Like, are you competitive?
I'm very.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm very competitive.
Yeah.
Just ask my family. I think it's how we see it. So I say this because I was that minister that was like, oh, how's our church doing compared to other churches? You know, like I couldn't, it's part of who I am. But now I'm thinking, what if we had to see that we're not in competition with other churches, but there's other things that we are in competition with? So what are we actually in competition with?
Okay.
Might not be other churches.
All right. Can you name a few? What are we on competition with, you think?
I'm not too sure yet. I haven't figured that out.
Well, I started thinking along those lines, and I decided to put the big box of culture and prevailing. They might be isms, but we'll translate it into actually things that we're buffing it up against. I mean, there are aspects in culture. So. I mean, here might be one. I mean, what do you do with the rugby on a Sunday morning?
Oh, true. Hey, I'll tell you what. Yeah,
well, I mean, do you have to compete with that? Do you ignore it? Do you work with it? How do you get around it?
Exactly. And are we competing? We actually are competing.
You basically are competing at that point.
Well, okay, so that's one. I got another one. Another thing churches are competing with is just the frantic busyness, or like the impulse to be busy and to always be doing and always be making money and always feeling like you're behind. We're living in a city like Auckland compared to living where I used to live, which is in more of a rural setting. I lived for 3 years. Very different mindset. Like there was so much ease to living rurally because no one else was really rushing around. Traffic wasn't a big deal. There's one set of lights in town, and it can take about 10 minutes to get through sometimes, but that's just 10 minutes. It's okay. But living here is just like, whoa, people feel like they're so far behind. And then so you're saying, hey, follow Jesus and be involved at church, and it's good for you, your family, your relationship with God, everything. And they're like, well, I have to keep doing. It's like, okay, well, that's a barrier. Yeah.
So here's a conundrum. So in New Zealand, and South Africans have a different mindset, I'm sure of this. But in New Zealand, you come to Easter. So as you're approaching Easter, as a minister, you think it's a very important time for the Christian story. So, you have various services that actually pick the story. But the problem is that most people think, oh my goodness, I've got 5 days, let's go away. So
very different to Canada.
What do you do? What do you do with that?
Yeah.
I mean, those are very real distinctives. So, is it a competition now? So I think there are some challenges, and to think and I'm not sure what the answer is that, but maybe it's a sense of catechism.
I don't know.
Yeah,
but that's a good one.
I don't.
Okay, we'll go back to the original question in a second, but that was a good one to point out. When moving here, I was just like, oh my goodness, Easter is like one of the lowest attended weekend services around in the calendar year. And in Canada, we had triple attendance on Easter Sunday. Was that the same in South Africa?
Oh yeah, South Africa. I mean, we had services. So in the church I was in, we had services twice a day, every day, the week leading up to Easter.
Oh really?
Yeah, and then we'd have like 4 services on a Sunday because it was so full. Like Easter Sunday was huge.
People.
Yeah, we'd have sunrise services, normal services. It was Easter and Christmas were the biggest services in South Africa.
Welcome to New Zealand.
Well, New Zealand, half the churches were closed over Christmas.
Oh,
I know, isn't that crazy? What I kept track of it. I kept attendance records quite meticulously when I came to the church in 2018 because they weren't really being kept. And I'm like, I want to see some attendance trends just to see when to put our most effort in and when not to. The second term 4 hits in the calendar year, which is September to November, or October to the end of December rather, just slow, precipitous decline. All the way to Christmas. Yep, it's crazy. About September, October is peak attendance, and then once the weather starts getting better, it's just like, all right. But this brings back into view, if we go back to the original thought, so you can fight up against those trends. You can be like, no, just be different people. But you're saying, hey, there's actually some strategic thinking and some identifying and some help from the business world as to how they target what's actually in competition with them versus what the church feels like it's in competition with. And you're saying we're not in competition with other churches. We know that. You should start feeling like that's true, because you might not be feeling like that's true, even though you know it's true. We're in competition with other things possibly. So if we speak more to like the strategy side of things that you've been learning, how would you, if you were to talk to a church or consult a church of maybe like 300 or 400 or 500 people, so a few people on staff, how would you maybe begin to have a strategic conversation with them? Would you bring some acronyms in? Would you, I don't know, how would you approach that? How would that be approached from a pastoral or a church perspective?
So, I mean, obviously there's the spiritual side of it, and it's the praying and those things that have to be part of everything we do. I remember I worked with a lady once. She was part of our like executive, and she said to me, she was a big CEO in a international company, and she always used to say, what churches need to realize is that they're not corporate. They're supposed to be corporate plus.
Yeah, so what's that mean?
So it's like you're supposed to like have the good principles of running an organization well, but there's this added responsibility that the money people are giving is not just money to the church. It's actually their money contributing to God's work. You know, it's like people's time is for. So it's the church has a greater responsibility for everything than just an organization. In terms of what I would do is I would love to go to a church and say like, okay, here's some of the principles that I've learned. Here's some of the frameworks that we were practicing in the MBA. So one of them, for example, is a PESTEL analysis, which just looks at, you know, what is happening outside of the organization from a political, environmental, social, technological, economic, and legal perspective. What are some of the pressures that we're facing externally in the church?
Taking context.
Yeah, so context, you know, what is happening around us that's putting pressure on the church. Then look at some of the internal pressures. Do a SWOT analysis. I mean, that's a good old favorite, you know, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Look at those things. So what are the external pressures? What are our internal pressures? What are our internal gifts? What are things that we should stop doing? What are things we should do more of? And then you could look at even one of my favorite frameworks it's called the BCG framework. And it's more about products, and it's saying that every company has products that fall into one of 4 categories. The one category is that it's a star product. So it just keeps generating revenue, it's just doing really well. Then you get the dog, which is the opposite of that. It's just this.
It's called a dog?
Dog.
A dog. I was like, sorry, Dougs.
All those Dougs out there, you're okay. It's just accent playing here.
Doug, D-U-G.
Dog,
D-O-G.
D-O-G.
Oh my gosh, Joey. Yeah, okay, keep
like
going.
A wolf.
Well, like a wolf.
Wolf.
Like a bow wow. Okay,
bow
good.
wow, yeah, you got
Yeah. Thank you for the help.
And I forgot what I was even saying. So anyway, so you get like star products, and then you get like products that have a lot of potential, and then you get products that they kind of tick along and they just need to keep doing. And then you get the dog, which is this product that, you know, it's just doing the company harm. It's not going anywhere. And I think churches, if I don't want to say that our ministries are products, because that's such a terrible way of looking at it. But there is a sense that we sometimes offer things in a church, and some of them just really do well, and we need to invest more time and effort in it. And other things, they've passed their sell-by dates, and it's time we let go of them because they're actually just causing too much pressure on the whole church. And we're trying so hard to revive it all the time. Maybe it's time to say, let's just let that go. And organizations do that well, but I think churches, we have so many...
Because is it more complicated? Because there is, in the sense of a business, its fundamentals of business are this and this and this. Whereas a church, you could get a lot of leakage or leverage, is that actually, no, this is what God has told us to do, or this is actually what church. I mean, there are a whole lot of social investments into that, or you could say. I don't want to say spiritual investments, but in one sense they are. They're religious investments.
Well, I'll give you an example. Yeah, so there's a tension. You're saying in the business world, there's black and there's white. There's the products that are doing incredibly well, and there are these products that, why are we still doing these? But I think a lot, because of it goes back to what you said, what is the purpose of the church? Sometimes with the purpose of the church, it involves actually maintaining the things that don't seem like they're going well on an effective basis. So I'll give you an example, but we know in principle that churches need to do these things, even though we might not be seeing a lot of impact possibly through it yet. So I'll give you an example. Evangelism is obviously a key one, right? And so at the church, we've been running Alpha for 2 years solid. We've done 3 courses over the course of less than 2 years, actually. And I think there's been a couple people that have attended the church now, some real like impact. But if we're talking about like just like big grand impact, like, okay, how many people, how many decisions for Jesus, how many, X, Y, and Z. Yeah, we've put in a lot more resources, time, money, and effort for what, if you just had like a business lens on, you wouldn't see it as, it would be one of those dog possibly products. But we don't believe that, because principally we believe that, hey, we think God could do something with this, and because he has with other churches, he has in the past, so we're going to tough it out. And he has already done little glimpses of things, so like, why not just keep going, even though we're spending, like, out of all the ministries, this is probably the most time and money and effort. Yeah.
And I think that comes back to, what are we measuring church with? Business is so, I don't want to say easy, but it's like, it's profitable or it's not. But one of the lecturers did say to us when we were looking at the BCG framework, he says, sometimes you need to understand that a dog product is actually somebody's pet.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
True.
And you just need to hold on to it, because it has this
there are implications if you annihilate the pet.
Yeah, and I think sometimes in church, it is so much more complicated, because we can't just say, oh, we've been putting so much resources into our children's ministry and we have no return. Yeah. So we're just going to can it. Like that wouldn't be the very best strategic decision at all.
Yeah.
Because it's not about money for a church.
Yeah. What was BCG again, if you could spell that acronym out? BCG?
I cannot remember.
I see. This is what happens in New Zealand. When you move here, you just live by acronyms, and you don't even know what the acronyms mean. It's like you just forget about the history of it all. What do you got, Graeme? You got a thought?
Well, I'm thinking, because part of it, and I'm wondering with your, the work you did with your MBA, that where it goes has to go down deeper into the organisational system, in beliefs, in values. That's where the operation is. Because I'm thinking like that idea of like, the thing just needs to die. And I've seen churches think it just needs to die. And partly it doesn't want to die because people don't want to cross the threshold of like, it's better the devil I know than the one I don't. And so they keep holding on. So what in your MBA studies, was that something that you sort of talked about? In business, it's sort of, you have a CEO, in the end of the day, people turn up because they're paid. You want it to be more than that, but in the end of the day, they've got a job to do.
Exactly. I think the other thing is to look at, so in business, one of the things that we were taught is that you look at a product life cycle. Yeah. And when it looks like it's heading towards dying, you have a few options. You can either diversify, you can market it more, you can penetrate the market, so there's options of what are we going to do with this, because every product has a life cycle where it has a growth moment, then it peaks, and then it dies off. And so if you don't do something while it's dying, it will die, and so maybe it's the same with when we look at these ministries that we have, say like, where are we on the growth curve? Okay, so we are busy growing. Fantastic. Let's enjoy this moment. We've hit our peak. Oh, we're busy. This ministry is busy dying. What do we want to do with it? Do we want to market it more? Do we need to, diversify it? Do we need to make a plan with it? Or are we going to allow it to die this death, knowing that some people are very attached to it? So I suppose it's just, but I think sometimes what I was doing in church is you kind of just put blinkers on and go like...
Just ignore it.
Yeah, just kind of ignore it and hope and pray that something will happen.
Yeah, and you're saying there's probably too much of that going on, possibly. and it's a pet, right? It might be a precious thing, but it might be a precious thing that's just silly in the grand scheme of what the church is all about. But it might be a pet that's a really precious thing within the grand scheme of things what the church is all about. But there's different ways you can kind of package it. I know, you can package it in the sense of, well, we really do care about evangelism at the church, clearly, and we've been doing, I'll give you an example, back in the 60s and 70s in Canada, I don't know if it happened here, Graeme, there was this thing called a bus ministry, and so literally, and parents would never do this now, but the pastor would get a bus on Sunday morning and pick up all the kids and drop them off at church. Well, I don't know if that happened in South Africa too. Yeah, very popular, but honestly, I don't know any parents, at least in the area that I live in, would allow that to happen. They would not drop their kids off on a bus with this person they kind of know, but not really, to say, hey, go have fun on Sunday morning. And then also the fact that the parent isn't there on Sunday morning means there's like a liability issue. So it doesn't work now. So like the pet is like, it's like, oh, it's evangelism. That's the thing we care about. But the method and the model or the packaging needs to shift and change because things have changed.
That reminds me, just a little story, because I think it's quite funny. I remember when, because my father was the superintendent of the Sunday school, this is way back in the 60s, and we used to pick up people, and we got 16 into a car one day. 16!
A five-seater car. All right.
Yeah, it was an old PA Valiant, 16 in the car, it was incredible. 16 in the car. You couldn't do that now.
It's for Jesus, though, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
You're protected.
16 in the car. That's a lot of people.
You're not going to get into a crash or anything.
No.
You're going to church.
We're going to church.
Right?
Because you had to pick up all the kids for Sunday school.
Yeah, exactly.
16.
Exactly. So let's backpedal a little bit. We kind of hinted, and you mentioned at the very beginning, churches need to know what they're about. They be about a bunch of things or a few things? In your opinion, as you've been wrestling through ministry philosophy and understanding what, if you ever become a pastor again, what do you think the church, from your perspective, your experience, your history, needs to be about? Like if there's some non-negotiables in your opinion, that it's just like, now you can't be targeted. You gotta live within this tension of all these things. You can be a bit dreamy if you want.
It has to be about Jesus.
Oh, that's a good start.
It's such a difficult question. I think for me it would be, there are some fundamentals, and I joke and say it has to be about Jesus, but it actually does have to be about Jesus.
Because it's surprising how many churches aren't.
And some churches are really profitable, and I wonder...
Yes, I know.
Exactly, like, is this church still about Jesus and the gospel? And the gospel is countercultural, and the gospel sometimes doesn't make sense, so it has to be about Jesus, and it has to be about the gospel. It has to be about the people and meeting the needs of the people. We're living in a world where people are so desperate for connection, for truth. So it has to have a very strong element of the people. So kind of, love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. It has to incorporate those two things. And then how we do that, I think each church can have its own flavor of how we do those things.
What do you think so the word success is not it's not. It's simply not a biblical concept. And yet that's the language that we often apply to a matrix that's measuring outcomes. Is it successful? So then, can you incorporate the notion of, say, a John 15, or more broadly, those two words like faithfulness and fruitfulness? How would you use those as in a matrix or in a framework?
Sorry, we're going off script already.
Well, what I'm saying...
Those are good questions.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, because we are talking about sort of business measurement, which is good, but it can have that sort of trajectory towards that's successful, that isn't successful. Have you thought much about that?
Yeah, I think we sometimes in the church fall into the trap of measuring success by attendance.
Yes.
So the more people in church are, obviously the better we're doing.
Because it's concrete. You can see it. You can
see it,
right?
like,
Yeah.
You know, and there's nothing more disheartening than preparing every Sunday and watching fewer and fewer people come to church.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, questions have got to be asked.
Yeah.
It's not very fruitful.
No, it's not very fruitful. And then if we become despondent, we're not going to be very faithful.
No.
You know?
Yeah.
So, but the question is, how do we know that something's fruitful? You know, so it's like maybe the church only has 10 people, but maybe those are the exact 10 people that God wants in the church.
I mean, we've heard those stories. We know those stories. 10 people prayed for. Well, I mean, here's the one. William Carey. I mean, it's a total failure.
Can you tell the story a little bit for context?
Well, I think it's about 13 years, and then the thing burns, and nothing happens.
I don't know the story, Graeme, at all. You gotta fill me in.
William Carey is the sort of father of modern missions.
Okay.
1800.
Oh, did he go to India? Is that
go to India.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I mean, and there would be probably countless other missionaries that didn't look particularly. I mean, another mission here in New Zealand wasn't particularly.
So you're saying he went to India. It seemed like a bit of a failure. But
it seemed a bit of a failure. It was sort of not until after sort of 12, 13 years that actually things changed.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you can't. Yeah, you got to have the long term in mind. But still, you're viewing that story, Graeme. Yeah. You're going against your original question. You're viewing that story within a success matrix.
Well. Yeah, I guess.
Are you, or is there? You know what I mean?
Well, that's the tension, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's the tension. Is I mean, his ministry was incredibly fruitful.
Yeah,
because of not just what happened in that, but it was what it created, what it burst out on the world. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, something I have to. I mean, we're always wrestling it. We wrestle with it around here. I mean, you don't want to keep doing the same thing if it's not working. And in New Zealand, we're really pragmatists. You Kiwis are really pragmatic. You know that, don't you? If it works, it's right. It's me to say it's right, but that's the problem. If it works, it's right. But the flip side of that is not everything that works is not always right.
Mm-hmm. So I think the success thing is a whole conversation, and because it plays into our metrics conversation we had a while ago, and one of our colleagues is reading the book that we read, The Tyranny of Metrics, which is a really interesting book because it helps you redefine what is success, what isn't, and also how to interpret data and what data you should listen to. But let's park that for a second.
I think very cool.
So I want to go into your thesis. Your what you actually wrote on and what you presented on that I thought was so interesting. So you wrote, you correct me if I'm wrong, and then maybe you fill in the gaps a little bit. You wrote on Afrikaans churches. Did I pronounce that correctly? Did I say that nicely?
Which is very well done.
Thank you. I'm not going to say it again, or else I'll say it like a Canadian. So you wrote on those churches, and there's, I forget what the term is, but there's a sense in which migrant communities from South Africa want to still maintain their South African culture, but there's a tension because that usually just sticks with the first generation, where the second generation of their kids, who maybe weren't born here but have been here long enough, they begin to identify differently than their parents did. And so that's not just a South African story. That is basically every single migrant community that has a very distinct cultural difference compared to New Zealand broader culture. So maybe let's just go through the whole gamut of it. What did you do? How did you go about this, number of churches, whatever? And what did you find? Like, what was the big point that you're like, oh, this is very interesting?
Okay. Wow. So I think what I did is firstly did a whole bunch of research on other churches around the world that have transplanted. So when a group of migrants move to a foreign country, sometimes churches will transplant with those migrants and see, oh, here's a need for Afrikaans people that need an Afrikaans church because it's now in an English country, or it would happen with Korean or Chinese or Asian or German or any country essentially. And so these transplanted churches go to where there's a lot of migrants and they start a church. What happens then is, so I did a study on a group of different churches around the world that have done this, transplanted churches, looked at other research to see what they've said. And most of the other research says that there's a problem that the second generation, it's called the silent exodus, that the second generation leave these transplanted churches because they no longer identify with the church. So firstly, the language becomes a problem because the Afrikaans children, when they come to New Zealand, all their schooling is in English, their friends are in English. So they lose something of that Afrikaans language. And then the second thing is culturally. So sometimes these children often assimilate into the new culture because it's become their dominant culture. And so these churches will sometimes operate from a cultural perspective in the same way that their parents always operated back in the home country. And then these second generation children are going, actually, we don't feel like this is home for us. It doesn't feel like we fit in. We don't necessarily believe with everything that is happening in the church, not from a belief perspective, but from a cultural perspective. So the way leadership happens, the way management happens, the way communication happens, all those cultural things, the children, the second generation, then don't necessarily identify with it. So then what I did is I contacted all the Afrikaans churches in Auckland. I had to keep it small. I could have gotten the whole of New Zealand and then it just would have been way too long and too much. So I looked at just the churches in Auckland, contacted the Afrikaans churches in Auckland. 4 out of the 6 Afrikaans churches agreed. And then I met with people from those churches. It was either the minister or key volunteers, interviewed each of those people, interviewed 12 people in total, and then did an analysis on what they were saying. So I did semi-structured interviews. So I had interview questions that I asked. And then after that, I looked at, I just did this qualitative thematic analysis. Just looked at the themes throughout all the answers and took it back to my research questions. So that's kind of what I did.
Yeah. So it was thorough within the 5 churches that you're looking at. You're just trying to identify, okay, what's actually going on? Who do they, correct me if I'm wrong, do they see themselves as being a more Afrikaans type church, or are they trying to integrate in some way, be like a halfway between South Africa and Auckland, or are they actively trying to move into being more contextual within this space now and be multicultural? Yeah, so what did you find in that?
So I think I found a few things. The first thing that I found, which was quite interesting, is that a lot of the people that joined the Afrikaans church joined because of what we'd call social identity theory. They had this need for a group of people. So many people used language like, we were struggling, so we just needed something that felt familiar. We needed to worship in our home language because everything else kind of felt so foreign to us. So it's this idea that social identity theory states that people join a social group and they get some of their own identity out of that social group. And as the social group value increases, our personal value increases. And so I found that a lot of people joined these Afrikaans churches because of this need for something that felt familiar, something that made them feel better about themselves. Because when you enter into a foreign country, you hit culture shock, which just means that everything in you kind of disintegrates, and it's like you become into your infant state again. And so these people joined, a lot of people joined the Afrikaans churches for that need. But then what I found is that the longer people are in New Zealand, the more we shift towards the New Zealand culture. Not everybody, some people held onto their Afrikaans culture like you cannot believe. One person shared with me they've been here for 21 years and they're still mainly deal with Afrikaans people. Like they said they hardly ever speak English, even in business. I was like, wow. Anyway, so most people assimilate. And so we had these different stages where some people were still very Afrikaans, South African culture, which is quite high power distance, a very forward communication style. And then we had people that have shifted and they've become slower paced, less driven, less forward in their communication, a lot gentler, more egalitarian, which is more of a Kiwi culture. And so these Afrikaans churches were now accommodating people that are all on the spectrum of shifting in their cultural practices. which sometimes causes internal conflict. Because on one hand, you have people that are saying, this is the Afrikaans way of doing it, and we must do the church like this, and we must lead it like this, and it has to be strong and driven. And then on the other hand, you have people that are saying, actually, it's more about, slow things down, let's be more collaborative.
Yeah.
And so you have these groups that then form within the church, and then there's often these church splits. So there was a lot of internal conflict within the Afrikaans churches, particularly one denomination.
This is not unusual for Korean churches as
Yeah,
well.
it followed the same pattern as the Korean churches.
Because they feel that tension. There's a generational tension, and then like you have teenagers, and so I imagine you're attending an Afrikaans church, and then you're like, well, what about for my kids? And then that's where the tension begins, right? And you're like, well, maybe things are shifting or realigning.
Yeah.
What I consider to be valuable. I did consider, maintaining this culture identity for the sake of my kids valuable, but now I'm like, things are moving in a different direction.
And so people either leave or try and change, like help the church shift a little bit to accommodate their children. And so you have this tension within it. In addition to that, the Afrikaans church, what they were struggling with is it wasn't non-denominational, it was multi-denominational. So I thought that was so fascinating.
Another layer on top.
So it's another layer on top of that. So the one participant shared it that you have these extremes from like the Dutch Reform, where everything, he was like, people would say to him, you didn't light the candle at the right time, or you didn't say this prayer at this moment. He says, and then you'd have the other extreme where he described it, or this person described it as chandelier swinging Pentecostals. And so you have these groups where everybody, and the church, the Afrikaans church, some of them, have allowed people to hold on to their original denominational practices, even in one congregation. So you have people sitting in the same congregation that say, we only believe in infant baptism, and other people that were saying, we only believe that you have to be baptized full immersion in the ocean. Some were saying you have to use alcohol for communion, and others were saying we must not use alcohol. And they're all gathered in one church and allowed to practice their denominational practices within that church.
That sounds like a hot mess.
Yeah.
That sounds like that's. So I'm not surprised.
I'm not sure I'd want to be a pastor in that context.
That'd be tough.
So now you add
Really
that
tough.
layer onto the layer of the culture shift, onto the layer of the language, and that's the Afrikaans churches in Auckland. Not all of them, most of them.
Oof.
So within your research, that's what you've identified. There's this intense tension, not just specific to the Afrikaans churches, but any church that is a splinter kind of cultural church, whether it's a Fijian language or Tongan language church or Korean church.
Jackson here is part of a church. There's 500. It's an AOG church. It's 500 Indians.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what dialect they speak, or if it's Hindi or it's other one, but I mean, what I understand, it's fairly mono-ethnic.
Yeah, exactly. Probably because there's.
I mean, mono-ethnic in India. I mean, you've got a variety in India, so we can't.
But like that diversity in India is more similar than being comparing
That's
India
right.
to Auckland, right? And so you gravitate towards that.
Yeah, and then so there's layers of what I call but cultural belief, and I don't mean cultural belief. I'm talking about theological beliefs that are culturally contained. Which probably been exported by the missionaries from US, and So sorry, Graeme, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah.
But so with all that research, the hard kind of strategic, if you will, business side, because it was a business thesis, the hard business side is like, okay, so what are churches supposed to do with this knowledge, basically? Because did you propose action points for churches? What were some of those?
Okay, so I did propose action points. Most of them were related to what business cross-cultural leadership, which is all about intercultural communication and leadership styles.
Okay, so what's that?
So it was simple, like it sounded so simple. I was almost disappointed.
Yeah.
Like I was like, oh, that sounds so simple, but perhaps it could work. The first one is to have very clear goals.
Yep.
So when you have people who've joined this church or organization partly because of social identity theory, then they've made smaller groups within the church, which is now causing friction and conflict. The best way to solve conflict between subgroups in any organization is to have a very clear goal so that all the subgroups are working towards the same thing. So in any intercultural leadership management, when people have a clear goal, those clear boundaries between the subgroups kind of diminish when people are working towards the same goal. So if these Afrikaans churches could have a very clear goal, this is our goal, and communicate it clearly so that people then start having the same journey, because when they have the same goal, those divides kind of, suddenly those things don't matter as much, those things that are dividing. So that was the first one.
So along with that one, I see that one paralleling within what churches do to mix generations together is get them to serve together. It's like, oh, well, you have like a hospitality ministry of coffee and tea and whatever biscuits after the service. We have one guy who's in his 20s. We have one gentleman who's in his 60s, and then another mother who's in her 50s. It's like, well, there you go. There's like 3 cross sections right there of friend group, different friend pockets that are now mingling. And there's actually, the goal is to serve the tea and coffee. But then what happens is relationships build and walls and barriers and things kind of fall within that. Yeah. So that's not just for multicultural or intercultural.
It's for every church.
It's for every church. There's actually go in a direction and bring people of different, I guess, cliques, if you lack of a better term, together. So that was one. What was another one?
Yeah. Another one was partnering with external organizations and churches is quite important for the Afrikaans church, because they need to have a sense that they're doing good and that they're furthering the gospel, but Afrikaans is a barrier. You can't go to your neighbors and say, come with me to church when they don't understand Afrikaans. But through partnering with external organizations, for example, some of the churches were doing the Christmas boxes. Some of them were part of different minister fraternals, and then they would partner over Christmas or Easter with other churches. So things like that. Another one was, which sounded a little bit weird for me, but this is what I thought, is that for the second generation immigrants that are part of the church, they have this desire for cultural experiences. And so to actually intentionally do cultural experiences for second generation immigrants. So for example, a strong Afrikaans South African culture is 2 things. One is the braaiing, like braai and biltong, so like meat. The food, meat is very important for Afrikaans people. And then a second one is like Afrikaans music. So Afrikaans music is quite a big thing for Afrikaans people. Music? I'll send you some links.
Oh, you're not going to sing a song?
No, I'm not going to sing a song. And then they do a lot of what we'd call sokking, which is a specific type of dancing that Afrikaans people do. And so if we had to have moments for the second generation to do those things, even if they're having church in English, those second generation have often chosen to be part of those churches because they have this desire to still connect with their Afrikaans culture. Because else they would just go to the English churches, because the English churches are bigger, they have more to offer, they have more friends. So those children or those second generation that have connected with these Afrikaans churches, generally because they're quite high on the bicultural identity index, which means that they're actually longing for something that connects them with their culture. So give them the cultural food after church, give them cultural experiences.
Do you know what came to mind? But I think I need that link. I think, that Afrikaans, it's not kind of like line dancing stuff, is it? Anyway, that's by and by. We just now I'm interested to know what's Afrikaans.
Graeme is already thinking of how am I going to look up some Afrikaans music and dancing on YouTube.
I haven't heard this one before. So,
Well, it makes anyway.
Yeah.
So that makes complete sense to me. So what you're saying is within the strategy piece within the research that you've done for splintered churches, or is that the term?
Transplanted.
Yeah. Sorry, transplanted churches. If I had to put words in your mouth, you would say you probably need to consider moving into more of a multicultural space, or at least being accommodating in some sense, not all, but that's the tension is going to be moving in that direction, that you need to be somewhat accommodating for the next generation towards this third culture type space. And so if that's the case, and there's things that you can do to actually still make those who are first generation South Africans people feel like, oh, the culture is still here while you're still accommodating. And so I remember one of the things you mentioned is one church, within the lyrics of the songs, very basic, is they have both languages up on the screen simultaneously. In some songs they sing in Afrikaans and some in English. Because I know there's a church within my denomination that was, I hope I'm saying the history right, was Fijian initially, but I think they've identified that tension with the aging children and growing up, and then they intentionally made that shift towards being, no, we are not a Fijian church. We are a multicultural church. And because for the pastor, the purpose, like the why are we a church kind of thing, was, well, we want to see our young people flourish in faith, and we don't want them to just kind of wander off in a way. So we're willing to kind of be a lot more accommodating in the service, shift the language, shift some of the expectations. And then now what they find is, because after I think a decade or so of this, they are properly a multicultural church. Tons of different cultures, as would be the case in Auckland, right, are represented at the church, not just one subset of people. So it is practical. Like it does matter. Like what you've realized, these things, these strategic ways of approaching ministry and church, and even like implementing your ecclesiology, they actually matter.
So that becomes an important point. These points, these saying, because when you were saying that, the really you're saying the celebrating of culture. There's an intentionality about celebrating, but that as a theological concept of celebration and celebrating culture is good. I think you can make that jump. I guess the other part is thinking about there, which is where I'm thinking deeper, is a sense in which maybe part of church is that it does have a missiological element to it. It always should. So it always should be looking out. And that's a tension in terms of dysphoria churches. They're looking in.
And I think, so what was interesting for me is that the churches that I interviewed had a very definite purpose. So some of them saw their purpose as, we are here to care for Afrikaans immigrants. That's our mission.
Right.
And others, their purpose was, we're here and we started as an Afrikaans church, but we need to shift because we need to reach the wider community. But some of the churches definitely felt our purpose is purely to minister to the Afrikaans people, Afrikaans immigrants, because they're the ones that are struggling. And they were quite comfortable with the idea that people will come and go, because that was their purpose.
So as long as the immigration still happens,
Yes.
the church is
I was
still
going to
viable.
say,
Yes.
yeah. But you're going to have a lot of tensions there too.
Yeah. And I mean, so there was a church that just after the Second World War, there was a German church that transplanted into Canada.
Okay.
And this church thrived until the German immigration slowed down. And they did not accommodate the second generation, and they did not shift to become cross-cultural. And they eventually gave their church building away to a Korean church because
They were doing the same thing.
they had nobody left in the
Yeah.
congregation. So it's like, if that's your strategy, to say we're here purely to minister to the Afrikaans immigrants, that's fine. We better be keeping a very careful eye on the rate of immigration, because you don't want to shift too slowly, because the church will then have no...
So and that's what's that big acronym you mentioned, PESTEL or something.
Yeah.
That's when, like, being such a strategic thinker, I'm like, we should always, like, every 6 months just be, even just anecdotally, just looking out and being like, all right, what's going on politically, economically, environmentally, socially. PESTEL.
What was it?
Technologically. Legally.
And legally. Exactly.
Yeah.
Legally, immigration law.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I
all
mean,
those things.
the whole. I'm going to write that acronym down. I think it's quite helpful because, I think churches don't even think about the technology one too.
Well, that's your
huge.
passion.
Yeah,
point.
well, because we don't. Yeah, so that the acronym of PESTEL is actually quite helpful.
Yeah, well, this is okay. Shifting gears, and then I do want to show a video to get some feedback, some immediate response, just for fun at the end. But that I've noticed that as technology moves and progresses, we've kind of been like, oh yeah, this is great, this is awesome, with like a few kind of remnant voices being like, no, the phone sucks. No, you shouldn't have your kids shouldn't use iPads, things like that. But then all of a sudden AI gets really good. And now I'm like, this is all people are talking about is like, oh, hold up. We need to slow down because the technological world has just did a massive shift. And even, it's not just a pastoral or theological question. It's an economic question. It's a business question. It's you put the PESTEL filter through that, and you're like, oh my goodness, this actually impacts everything.
Yeah.
And so, so I guess within this conversation, it might be good for people like myself and who are church leaders, being like, okay, there are some times you do need to put the brakes on and slow down and really consider what's going on. And that's when the strategic end of some of what the business world has always been doing, or good businesses do, should be incorporated within the church's reflection and discernment process a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things is to look at, so it's the internal, like what are our internal pressures? What are our external pressures? Just like really simple. And then what are our disruptors? And the technological side of things is becoming a disruptor to every industry.
Yeah.
So what are we doing to consider this disruptor? Like COVID was a disruptor, but we didn't really see that one coming.
No, we didn't.
We didn't have much warning.
Yeah.
We have had quite a lot of warning about the technology. It's like it is going to be a disruptor.
Yeah, because you can just imagine what it's going to be like. And the only thing preventing it from taking over, not taking it, that sounds a bit dystopian, but the only thing from it being like in your face everywhere is just the data centers. There's not enough of them, and they need to go probably in Canada or in other places that are very cold for energy efficiency. So once they solve that problem, it's going to be rapid because the sky's the limit at that point if they have infinite amount of energy and cooling. Anyway, so there's that. I want to show a clip. It's kind of off topic a little bit, but not really. I want to get your initial reaction, and then we'll weigh in a little bit. I think there's a bit of a disgruntled or ex-pastor who I've been noticing on social media because I think he's trying to do a consulting, businessy type deal. And so he used to be a pastor, and he's come up with like some really good shorts, like YouTube video shorts and Instagram shorts. And I'm sure he's wearing a pair of shorts. And thank you for that chuckle. I appreciate it. And so he did one video. I looked for a bunch of them because he posted like 30 or 40 of them. But one in particular, I'm like, ooh, that one hits. That one hits hard. And I'm like, I think you might be right. So I'm going to turn the volume up. Hopefully, if someone's watching, they can see it.
Okay, church staff, you're not a family. You're more than likely a team. I think this shift in perspective and language could prevent a ton of hurt in the church. Yes, the church is a family, but the way that most ministry models organize staff and volunteers to make church happen is way more like a team, and there's a huge difference. Families don't require performance to belong, but teams do. On a team, your role is connected to how you perform. And when someone isn't contributing, or if there's a misalignment, development is required and sometimes changes are made. That's not wrong. That's just how teams work. And teams can possess healthy aspects like honor, respect, dignity, confidence, empowerment, all these things that a healthy family should demonstrate. But it's damaging when churches and organizations say they're a family, but operate like a team, especially if they lack the healthy characteristics that a healthy family would possess. That disconnect is disorienting.
Initial thoughts. What? Yeah, go for it.
Two initial thoughts. Firstly, because of the work that I've done with intercultural management, whose definition of family is he using? Because family is such a culturally defined definition. So for some families, family is like, oh, we all have a say and we can gather around the table and we all have an input. Other families, it's like the head of the family is the father and his word is law. So, my first thought is if you're going to say to your staff, oh, we're a family, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that the boss says everything and we cannot argue? We have to just do everything that he says? The second initial thought was that I hear exactly what he's saying. When I was over at church with multiple staff, it was so difficult to hold staff accountable because they kind of were like, oh, but we're part of it. I thought this was a church. And it's like, yes, it is a church, but you still have to perform. You are earning a salary. Like we do have expectations of you that we wouldn't tolerate this behavior in any other organization. Why do we tolerate it in a church? Just because we're a family and we're supposed to be pastoral. Like, yes, we are supposed to be pastoral, and organizations, even non-church organizations, can be pastoral in the way that we deal with our staff. But there's this thought that, because you're a church, you should just tolerate anything. It's so damaging, you know.
So here, I mean, this is where you're going to go, I'm sure. Metaphors matter.
Yes.
So one is, what metaphors are we using? Are we, and if we are talking about, and this goes back to some of the early kind of stuff written by Sengay in the 90s, in a book called, what was it called? Fifth Discipline. Mental models. What are your mental models? If we're talking about a car, is it the same car? Often it's not. So we have to drill. That's what you're saying. You've got to drill down. If we're going to use family about the church, what do we mean by that? And that's one. And then the other one is, well, is the metaphor appropriate to what it's being applied to?
Yeah.
Or what is the metaphors we're using? What are the hidden metaphors we're using? But this is your this is your stuff, really.
Yeah, well, I think the gut reaction, I'm like, I can empathize with what he's saying, because there's that. I thought that video was really important within our discussion, because it highlights that tension of business and church, or organization with compliance and with key performance indicators and expectations, versus the ecclesiology and theology of what it means to be the family of God. Because a part of me is like, yeah, if you're like larger churches, I think it's easier to kind of adopt a teamwork mindset as opposed to a family mindset when it comes to just the staff who are paid, only because the congregational expectations are, well, people are coming and going on staff. We get that. If you're like above maybe 10 or 15 staff, it kind of just happens where it's like, yeah, this person was here for 3 years and someone else came in. I've been here 30 years. This is just what it is. But for a church that's like 2 staff or 3, and then the congregation is maybe like 150 to 200 people, when that staff member leaves, or say their contract doesn't get renewed, that's not just a teamwork issue. That's a family congregational issue at that point, because this person has relationships with the majority of people at the church. And it's probably, this might be the only time in the past decade, or maybe the first time ever, that this church has had to deal with not renewing a contract, or saying goodbye to a staff member when they would have liked to have stayed on, saying fire. Churches typically don't fire people. They usually just run the contracts out, at least my experience, and then let time just pass, and then it's over. That might not be healthy, who knows. But do you feel that tension, right?
Yeah. I mean, even, so we went through a restructuring during COVID, and some of the staff had been there for like 20 years, and it wasn't just the staff, that was the whole congregation were impacted.
Yeah.
So I definitely understand that.
Yeah, because the congregation needs to maintain that the church is a family. However you culturally define that, it needs to be maintained that is the case, or else it turns into just some organization or club that's not the church. However, if you want your congregation to maintain that metaphor of family, and then you operate in non-family ways with the ministry teams that are paid, and I do appreciate the guy's distinction of teams versus family. Not everyone's going to see it as a team, especially those who aren't paid are not going to see the staff as a team. So I think his solution is idealistically great, but practically will not work. I don't think you can solve that problem unless, if you're like what most churches are, which is 50 to 200 people.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying too is that there is both those metaphors are permeable.
Yeah.
So when is it team and when is it family? And that sort of, it's a big thick line, not a thin one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's where the conflict could happen.
So yeah, go for it. Yeah.
I mean, like, Then you could say it on the other hand. It's like, okay, so if we are a family and I cannot pay you, you should be okay with that.
Yeah, you can. It's like, well, hold up. Wait, I'd like to get paid. Yeah.
So it is a two-way street. It's like, okay, so you're a staff member and you want me to treat you like a staff member because I have to pay you, and that's how we should be. But then,
you're turning it on and wanting the kind of understanding of a family member. So it's understanding those metaphors. Isn't it?
It's so challenging, and I don't think any of us have the answers.
So.
Thanks, Louise, so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah,
it was really great,
really
wonderful
good stuff. Thank you.
We've learned a lot, and thanks for being a good friend.
I've learned PESTEL.
PESTEL and
I'll
SWOT.
go away and think about that.
Good stuff.